We hear the word democracy thrown around constantly, right? By politicians, activists, the media, everyone. It's universally praised. But what does it actually do when the rubber meets the road? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to move way beyond the ideological cheerleading and conduct a rigorous, data-driven report card on how democratic systems actually perform in the real world. We talk a lot about democracy as this perfect ideal, but today we are looking at the hard evidence of what it realistically delivers.
We've got to begin with the ultimate dilemma, the big paradox that serves as our hook today. Think about it. We absolutely love the idea of democracy. We celebrate election days as these massive, historic triumphs. Yet, almost immediately, literally the very next day, we find ourselves deeply frustrated by its daily realities. We're constantly grumbling about the exact same elected officials we just put into power. It's a system supported all over the globe, yet so many of its citizens find themselves in a perpetual state of dissatisfaction. So what's going on here?
Okay, let's unpack this paradox by contrasting the lofty moral expectations we have of democracy with the, frankly, messy practical realities of everyday governance. On one side, as a moral ideal, we expect it to flawlessly promote equality, enhance human dignity, and cleanly resolve our deepest conflicts. That sounds amazing, right? But on the other side, in actual practice, it can be agonizingly slow. Instead of swift action, we get the frustrating reality of gridlock, endless debates in committees, and that distinct feeling that nothing ever gets done. It frequently seems to ignore the demands of the majority, and yeah, it notoriously struggles with entrenched corruption.
So to figure out if democracy is actually worth it, despite these glaring flaws, we are going to rigorously grade it across 4 key subjects on our report card today: political quality, economic performance, social harmony, and finally, dignity and freedom.
Let's start right off with the big one. Subject number 1, political quality. We're talking legitimacy, accountability, and the speed of decision-making.
Now, the absolutely crucial point here is that we need to reframe government slowness. It's not a catastrophic bug in the system, it's actually the necessary cost of time we pay to ensure public acceptance. Look, a dictator can easily make a lightning-fast decision to, say, build a massive highway right through a crowded neighborhood overnight, totally ignoring public opinion. But because they didn't consult anyone, that hasty decision might spark massive protests, and ultimately, it could fail. Democracy, on the other hand, takes the painstaking time to hold town halls, negotiate, and deliberate. While it definitely takes longer, the final decisions are much more likely to be accepted by the people and actually be effective in the long run.
And because democracy is based on established norms and procedures, it provides us with a vital structural tool that dictatorships entirely lack, and that is transparency. In a true democracy, you don't just get handed a final law that was cooked up behind closed doors. You actually get the right to look under the hood and see the messy engine of how it was made. You are legally allowed to examine the exact process of decision-making. This ensures that the government's actions can be scrutinized by the very people it affects.
Let's see how this actually works out in real life, because this is fascinating. Take the story of Nanu, a daily wage earner in a Delhi slum. His story brilliantly humanizes how transparency laws empower completely ordinary people against a massive, faceless bureaucracy. So Nanu lost his ration card, and he was totally ignored by officials for 3 long, agonizing months. He was basically treated like he was invisible. But then, he used his democratic tools. He filed a Right to Information Act request, demanding to know the daily progress of his application and the specific names of the officials delaying it. The shift in power was immediate. Within a week, an inspector visited his home. The very next day, his card was issued, and the formerly dismissive officer literally offered him tea, pleading with him to withdraw his application. That is democracy in action.
But here is the massive plot twist. Despite all those routine tales of corruption, red tape, and delayed ration cards we just talked about, grassroots support in South Asia is overwhelmingly pro-democracy. The numbers really speak for themselves here. A massive 93% in Bangladesh and 92% in both India and Sri Lanka believe democracy is the most suitable system for their country. Even when the system frustrates them daily, people deeply and fundamentally want to be ruled by representatives they actually elect.
Honestly, democracy's ability to generate its own massive legitimacy, like this staggering 98% support for rule by elected leaders in Sri Lanka, is just a profound outcome. It might be incredibly messy, but democracy undeniably wins a solid grade for political quality simply because it is the only system people actually want to live under.
All right, let's move on to where expectations often crash right into reality. Subject number 2. Economic performance. We really have to tackle the biggest misconception head-on here. Does choosing a democratic government magically guarantee wealth?
Well, if you think electing a president instantly guarantees a booming economy, the cold, hard data from 1950 to 2000 tells a very different story. Looking at 50 years of global history, the economic growth difference between poor democracies and poor dictatorships is practically a statistical tie. Dictatorships sat at 4.34% and democracies right behind them at 4.28%. The data clearly tells us that democracy, on its own, is not a magic wand for economic development.
And if we dig a little deeper, the data proves democracies absolutely do not automatically reduce poverty or guarantee wealth equality either. Staggering income disparities continue to thrive within elected systems. I mean, you can stand in line on election day and have the exact same voting power as a billionaire in South Africa or Brazil, but when you go home, the economic reality is vastly unequal. The top 20% in these countries commands over 60% of the national income, while the bottom 20% struggles to survive on less than 3%. So democracy grants political equality through the ballot box for sure, but it clearly doesn't guarantee economic equality.
Okay, so if it doesn't guarantee wealth, does democracy at least keep the peace? That brings us to Subject 3 on our report card, social harmony. This is where we evaluate how well the system navigates social diversity.
For a society to stay peaceful, majority rule cannot just be a sledgehammer that's used against everyone else. There are structural conditions required to peacefully negotiate our differences. First, the majority has to actively work with the minority. Power has to be fluid. Second, and this is huge, majority rule cannot be based on immutable traits, things you can't change, like your birth, religion, race, or language. And third, every single citizen must have a real chance of being in the majority at some point in time. Because think about it. If a majority is locked in based on something you cannot change, that means the minority is permanently locked out of power. And when people realize they have absolutely zero chance of ever winning or being heard, well, that is exactly when democratic harmony shatters. Which brings us to our final and honestly maybe our most important metric on the report card, dignity and freedom. This is where we look at what might be democracy's most undeniable triumph.
Look, discrimination absolutely still exists in democratic societies today. We all know that. But establishing freedom and equality as a legal baseline gives historically oppressed groups like disadvantaged castes and women the vital foundation they actually need to fight back. Remember, without democracy, fighting for women's rights or equality isn't just difficult. In an authoritarian regime, challenging the status quo is often outright illegal. Democracy provides the legal sword and the moral shield necessary to wage these long struggles against historical domination. And this builds to a truly fascinating point. The fact that you actively complain about your government is actually the ultimate proof that democracy is working exactly as it should. Just think about that for a second. The very act of expressing your dissatisfaction proves that you have evolved from a mere subject who simply obeys a ruler out of fear into an empowered citizen who expects better, knows their rights, and demands accountability.
So, to wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. Based on our real-world report card today, democracy clearly isn't a magical cure that instantly eradicates poverty, inefficiency, or corruption. It's simply a set of conditions. It gives you the structural tools, the transparency, the vote, the legal equality, the fundamental right to complain and demand change. Its examination never truly gets over. So with those powerful tools firmly in your hands, what are you going to demand next?